Clowns are stalking the streets. This world is a strange one. Lately, there's been a national upsurge of sightings of strange people in clown makeup, costumes, or masks terrorizing the streets. Most are just harmless pranksters, but a few are real creepers who have the worst intentions. Keep your eyes peeled. You might catch the colorful eye of a flamboyant killer. Tonight, I will share with you 5 allegedly true stories of killer clown sightings. But first, is your school haunted? Or have you had a scary experience at school? Send us your stories at darknessprevails.org/submit, and it may appear in an upcoming video. Now, on to the nightmare fuel. Number 1. A Love for Theater. Submitted by Gillian. This story took place 3 years ago when I was in 6th grade. I had always loved watching my school plays, so ever since 4th grade I attended drama club or theater. At the time, we were preparing for the play, The Wonderful World of Oz. I played a small part in which I was a jitterbug. We were all waiting in our singing room for further instructions on what we were going to be practicing. In the room, I would always hang out with either the other kids in my grade or the older kids and high schoolers. There had always been a tree in front of our school which was planted in remembrance of the previous drama director. It became a sort of legend at my school. Some said that his body was buried right under the tree. No one, of course, knew for sure if this was true. And to be honest, I did not believe it. Some even said that he haunted the theater, usually when a play was occurring, and sometimes he could be seen in the top row of seats sitting down and watching. I never believed that either, because despite me loving scary rumors, I didn't believe it was real and it just sounded stupid. That is until one night when we had gone to practice for the play. Not a lot of people were there at the time for some strange reason. Since I didn't really have anyone to talk to, I had started reading a book I had brought with me in case I got bored. That's when one of the other kids who was in my grade tapped my shoulder and said that he wanted to show me something. I asked him what he wanted me to check out, and he said that he thinks he may have seen someone in the band room, which, by the way, was directly next to our singing room, and you could look into the room through the window of the door which connected the two rooms. He looked to be seriously frightened. He said he saw someone in the room, but the band teacher was gone, so he didn't know who it could be, not to mention the freakiest part. All the doors to the room were locked. The band teacher always locked it up after they left. It was a bit unnerving, but I wasn't scared just yet. Since he kept asking me, I decided to check it out through the door's window, thinking it was just a prank. People at the school had always played tricks on me, so I thought this was one of them. I went down to the small and short hallway where the door was at the end. I looked through the window and at first I didn't see anything. Then as I turned my head checking out the rest of the room, that's when I saw someone. It looked to be a very tall man standing next to the door that led to the instrument room. What was even weirder was that the door was open. Again, all the doors in there are usually locked at night. The only details I could make out of the person, since it was very dark that night and no lights were on, was that the man was tall and wearing a fedora. I was scared and wondering how he got in. I wanted to call the police or something, but at the time I did not have a phone. The guy who had asked me to check it out was standing waiting for me at the end of the hallway. He asked me if I saw anything, and I turned toward him to answer him. Stupidly and nervously, I told him no, because he was already scared enough that I didn't want to frighten everybody else. He sighed with relief and said thanks. I told him it was no problem. I was about to go sit back down in the room, thinking maybe it was just my eyes playing tricks on me. Maybe it was just a weird shadow being cast by something. But I decided to look one more time just to be sure. In the band room there was a TV. I looked around and did not see the man at all anymore, and then I looked directly at the TV screen. On the TV, it was him. I know it was him, because everyone knew what he looked like, because there was a picture of him by the tree. And when I saw him, I nearly screamed. I felt like I became paralyzed. I couldn't move or even think. The only question in my mind was, how? How is he doing this, and why? I don't know why, but I saw him directly on the screen. He was wearing clown paint on his face, but his whole face covered the TV screen. The creepiest part about this was his smile. It wasn't a creepy smile, but it still brought shivers down my spine. His smile was like a welcoming one, a friendly smile. Then that's when I heard him say something, the words that creep me out to this day. He said, "Come over here, child, and let's practice together." I was freaking terrified, and I had no idea what to do. My first thought was that this was a dream. Just like I used to do when I was a child and I was scared, I closed my eyes and counted to 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I opened them, and as soon as I did, I screamed at the top of my lungs. Right in front of me through the window, it was him with the clown-like attire and makeup on. He was pressing his face to the window, donning that god-forsaken smile. I thought he was going to try and break the glass and kill me. Before anything else happened, one of the high schoolers came to check up on me. He touched my shoulder and asked if I was okay, and I screamed again as soon as he touched me, thinking it was the man. Instinctively, I turned around as fast as I could back to the door window. I was relieved because nothing was there. He asked me what happened and why I screamed. I didn't lie this time. I told him what had happened. He decided to have a look for himself. I told him he shouldn't, but he ignored me. I waited for him to scream like I had. I tried to convince him I was telling the truth, but he wouldn't listen. But he never screamed. We went back to the group to continue practicing, and for the rest of practice, nothing weird happened. That night, no matter how hard I tried, I kept thinking and even dreaming about that clown. I told my mom, but she just said you must be seeing things. I know I wasn't. It was too real. Either way, I did my best to forget it. That is until one night. We had just finished the play and were on our way home. My mom had gifted me flowers and a toy bear, despite my age. When I went to bed that night, I was waiting to have a good sleep. When I first laid down to bed, I heard a small crack. I checked under my pillow and found a piece of peppermint hard candy in a wrapper. There was a tiny note inside of it too. It said, "Great performance. I hope to see you in the next play. May this candy give you good dreams tonight. I've given you a pretty hard time, so here's a little reward. Sleep tight." The moment I read that, I checked all the corners of my room. I checked to make sure my windows were still locked. They were, and there were no traces of anyone being there. So I put the candy and note on my desk. I've never told anyone this, not even my parents. I feel like if I kept talking about him, it would only make it worse. So I kept it a secret, and to this day, I haven't been a part of any more plays. I still have that note, and I pray every day that it was simply one of my friends or relatives, someone who I told my creepy experience to, and took advantage of it to creep me out, because if it was really from the thing I saw that night, I don't think I could ever sleep again. Number 2. Creepy Clowns. Submitted by Themorrisonator. This happened a couple of weeks ago. A little background first though. I'm 16 years old and I look older than I am, and I walk to school every day. On this day it was dark outside, and I had started my walk to school at about 6 in the morning. This was around the time that the killer clowns were all over the news, but I brushed it off thinking if any clown messed with me I could just take them on. I was walking to school and getting ready to go under the underpass, but over me a train was crossing. I've always had a fear the underpass would collapse once I was under it, so I waited for the train to go by before I continued. As I was waiting for the train to finish going over the underpass, I heard a tree branch snap. I look behind me. Around me on either side of the road is dark woods. I look around scanning the trees, and I notice a bright red color. Around these parts it was common to see homeless people in their little camps for the night, and I thought this was what that was. So I turned back toward the underpass and waited for the train to exit. I didn't realize how long the train was, so I ended up waiting longer than I usually did. I was staring at my phone, reading texts and playing games. That's when I heard the footsteps behind me. Again, I turned around, and my heart pounded so hard I thought I was going to die. I saw someone in a clown costume with a baseball bat in his hand. Of course, I started freaking out. I was praying the train would end, but it didn't, and I did not have time to wait for it. So I closed my eyes and ran under the underpass, and I just kept running until I got to town. I stopped at a restaurant. Inside, I found the only other person I could. It happened to be the only employee there at the time. I told them everything. I admit I was pretty scared, so it all came out jumbled and loud, but they just laughed. I was so scared to finish walking to school, so I called my mom to come and pick me up. I tried to tell her what had happened, but she didn't believe me. After that day, I stopped walking to school. I don't know if it was a prank or not. All I know is that I thought my life was in danger. Number 3. The Closet Creature, submitted by Treyvon. It was a Friday. I woke up early in the morning to get up for work. I dragged myself out of bed and into the kitchen to make my coffee. I took very light-footed steps into my daughter's bedroom to give her a kiss on the head, trying not to wake her up. Then I tiptoe back to the kitchen and grab my coffee. "Good morning," I hear my daughter call from behind me, and I turn around and reply, "Good morning, sunshine." I tell her to go grab her stuff and get ready for school, and she walks back to her room and I hear silence. I walk into her room and saw her asleep in her bed. I wake her up and try to keep her awake, and I asked her why she's so tired, and her reply was the most bone-chilling thing I've ever heard. Let me remind you that she is just 8 years old. She told me, "Well, there's this scary guy who visits me at night." That's already really weird, so I ask, "You mean in your dreams?" And she says, "No, Daddy, when I'm awake, he comes out and tells me scary stories. They really keep me awake." She starts trying to look around me, like she's trying to look into her closet. I get up and go to check out the closet. There's nothing there but clothes. I made sure to tell her, if he ever comes again, let me know. "But Dad, I shouldn't have told you at all. He said if I told anyone, he'd hurt me." I replied, "No one will hurt you as long as I'm here, okay?" After that, I took her to school and I went to work. At work, my boss and I are having a conversation, and I end up telling him about this closet creature, and he laughs and tells me, "That's just her imagination. My kids have all said the same thing." I laugh too, but honestly, I'm a bit nervous about it. After work, I pick up my daughter and we go home. I make some dinner and ask her with curiosity to draw the closet thing. He only had a little bit of hair, a white face and a pointy nose. There was black around his eyes and blood on his suit. Even as a grown man, this scared me. If it was real, then what the hell was happening? And if it wasn't, then why was my daughter dreaming such disturbing things? I try not to show my fear. I wanted to know for sure if this was a dream, or if it was real. When she went to bed, I peeked into her room every 30 minutes or so. It must have been 1 in the morning, and I was still up. I had work the next day, but I couldn't go to bed without knowing, because either way, my daughter had a problem, and I needed to help. I needed to know what was happening. So I waited till she went to bed, and I peeked into her room every 30 minutes to see what was going on. Everything was pretty quiet. She lay in her bed still most of the time, perfectly quiet and perfectly asleep. Another 30 minutes pass by and I walk into her room. I peek around the corner. She lay in her bed, asleep. But before I go back to waiting for a little while longer, I look up to the window next to her bed. I couldn't breathe. Similar to her drawing, a man in what appeared to be a clown getup was tapping at her window. It looked like he was mouthing something to her. Something like, "Hey, wake up." At this point, I was outraged. I wasn't even thinking. I ran over to the window. He saw me before I reached him and took off. I realized I should have went out the front door and snuck up on the freak, but it was too late. "Daddy, what's happening?" My daughter was awake now. I told her to stay put and I climbed out of her window. Outside, I saw the guy running down the road as fast as he could. He was gone. Immediately, I called the police and filed a report. It's been several weeks now, but they never found anyone matching the description. It scares the hell out of me knowing that freak is still out there and he knows where we live. Later that night, or should I say morning, I set my daughter down and gave it to her straight. I drilled it into her head that she is not supposed to talk to strangers, to anyone she doesn't know, and to keep her window shut and locked. But after that, I boarded up that window so no one would be getting in or out, and for the longest time my daughter slept with me. But Jesus Christ, this was the most awful experience. It scares me knowing what kind of perverts and freaks are out there, and I try not to think about what could have happened had he ever gotten inside. And what about the part of him being in the closet? I asked my daughter about it, and she told me he used to sleep in there. Number 4. Jack Frost, submitted by CHK5. I used to live in a house that was built in the 1800s, and it was always pretty paranormally active. I've seen very scary stuff in that house, such as the time that I actually saw my imaginary friend. But that's a different story. This story happens from my mother's point of view when I was a baby. From what she tells me, she saw a clown in my room. I was only a few weeks old. My father was working night shift and it was just my mom and I. I had no door on my room and the hallway ended with my room straight ahead, so you can see inside of it if you were standing at the end of the hall. The only other room in that hallway was the bathroom, and that was at the right. The hallway itself was very narrow. My mom apparently heard me one night, laughing, and walked through the hall. Then she saw the same thing I saw as I grew up in that house. It was a tall, blue figure wearing all white. It had spiked blue hair and was standing over my crib, just waving at me. My mother screamed a blood-curdling scream, and the thing disappeared. She tells me when it was gone, all that remained was a clear mist and a cold air. Fast forward 6 years later, my parents' bedroom was straight ahead of mine, meaning you had to walk through their bedroom to get to the hallway where my room and the bathroom was. I was in their room watching TV, and I saw a shadow on the wall coming from the bathroom. At first I thought it was one of my parents, but then I saw the familiar, spiked hair that the shadow had, and I knew who it was. Then the toilet flushed and the sink turned on. When I went around the corner to see for sure, the only thing left was a running sink and cold air. And again, there was a clear mist. I ended up calling the thing Jack Frost. We moved out of that house 4 years ago, but during my time in that house, I've had many experiences. And number 5. A clown was stalking me. Submitted by Jack. At the time this happened, I was 14. And weirdly enough, I was going to the circus that was in town. If I remember correctly, the place was called the Clown's Nest. It's a weird name, I know, but I was going and I was excited. I bought my ticket and some popcorn, and I went in and took a seat. The backstage door opened slightly. Inside was makeup and what looked like a man. He must have been nearly 40 with green dyed hair. I sat back and relaxed, waiting for it to start. There were 3 other clowns, 2 men and a woman. The woman was skinny and one of the men were pretty tall and muscular. The second guy, the third clown, was the one I had seen backstage. He had green hair and red lipstick with white makeup, but he had black eyes, which must have been contact lenses. The clowns ran around throwing flowers to the audience down below me. Then a man with black spandex covering his body ran in. He climbed a pole and jumped down onto a trampoline. I noticed that the older man clown was missing. The show went on for a few more minutes when I heard a raspy voice to my left. A few minutes ago, a man and his daughter had sat down next to me, and recently the man had gotten up to go to the bathroom or to go to the concession stand. I listened, and the voice asked, "Hey kiddo, you want to go backstage?" The whole situation sounded freaky, so I turned to my left, and there was the clown standing very creepily next to the girl. Better yet, the girl actually said yes. Then the clown told her, "No worries, I'm your dad's friend." They stood up to walk off, and being both weirded out and worried, I decided to follow them. I couldn't help but think that this guy was a freak. Before they made it backstage, I had had enough. I grabbed her hand. Surprised, they both looked at me. I told her that I'd buy her and her dad popcorn if she just came back to her seat. Quietly and politely, she said okay. The clown made a sort of angry face and then walked away. I don't really know what he was planning, but I couldn't help but feel angry at the guy. Anyway, like I had promised, I took the girl to her seat and bought her and her dad popcorn. I explained to him what had happened and he thanked me. We actually ended up walking home together and we talked. He once more thanked me for what I did and said he'd be sure not to leave his daughter alone again like that. They both went inside and I began my walk home. My place was only a couple of blocks down anyway. I couldn't help but notice that behind me was a man in a hood. I didn't want to be the jerk that immediately assumed the guy was a creeper, but after making a few turns, he was still following me. Finally, when I turned onto my sidewalk, I turned around and asked him if I could help him. Then I heard the same raspy voice from before say, no, he was just looking around. I told him, okay, but you should probably go home now, it's about midnight. And then he replied that he thought it was for sale. I said, no, it's not for sale, I live here. Then I told him so long, I've got some friends waiting on me. But when I turned around, I heard him say that there was no friends waiting on me. This kind of freaked me out, because I had been lying to make sure he knew there were other people not so far away. I didn't reply this time, and I just kept walking. I got inside and immediately looked out the window. The guy just stood there, for the longest time. I was nervous to call the cops. I've never done that before, but I was getting scared. I stayed up until 3 in the morning staring at the guy. He was just on the sidewalk, looking toward the house. He didn't move an inch. Eventually, the freak blew a kiss at me and then walked away. The next day, I told my parents what had happened. I think they believed me, but they found the story funny, which kind of irritated me. To this day, I do not trust clowns, and if I had a moral to the story, it'd be to always look after your kids. It only takes a few seconds for a strange old man to take them. And there you have it. 5 allegedly true stories of these supposed children's entertainers acting in a far more terrifying performance. So the next time your kid has a birthday party, if you happen to be one of the remaining few that think clowns are fun, think again, or you might end up missing a kid or two. Good night. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Thanks.